Hey everybody, welcome to Drive-Thru Review 685. Today we're going to take a look at Blue Lagoon. This is from Blue Orange Games, designed by Reiner Knizia, and this came out about a year and a half ago from the time of this video, so in 2018. Now if you remember last year in 2019, I reviewed a game called Babylonia, also from Reiner Knizia, and it actually made my top 10 games of the year. And I've kind of sort of been not paying attention to Reiner Knizia designs. He's one of my favorite designers. Some of my favorite games are designed by him. Those are usually much older games. But last week I reviewed Quest for El Dorado. Last year I reviewed Babylonia. And this is another one that had been brought to my attention. And this is kind of in the same ballpark as Babylonia, which is also kind of in the same park as like a Through the Desert / Samurai and Tigers and Euphrates thing. So this is kind of more like his Through the Desert design from, I don't know, 20 some years ago now at this point, although it is very, very different. It kind of stands on its own. So let's jump down to the table. I'll show you how it plays, and then I'll come back and kind of give you my thoughts and a little bit of context on where I would kind of, place this amongst his other games. Okay, so I've got the main board set up here. You can see it's made up of various different islands. And on the board, we've seated various different goods. You can see these little wooden components. We put these on these little sites here with these monuments and circles like so. You just put these out randomly. You have a bag that the game comes with. You draw these and just randomly put these out to start the game. Now the game is actually played twice. So if you take a look at the score pad here, you can see we've got two sort of rounds, if you will. So you've got one set of scoring that's going to happen, then you're going to kind of reset the board, and then you're going to play out some more rounds and then score the game again. So the gameplay between the two modes is almost identical, but it is very subtly yet relevantly different. So let's talk about how you're going to play the first mode of the game, and then we'll talk about the second mode. So players have these pieces here. You have three types of pieces. Now you have these settlers and these villages. Now these settlers are actually double-sided, so these act differently based on which side you place them down on the board, whether land or in a water space. And you also have these villages here, which have this cute little door that's painted on the sides of each of those, so you can also place those. So on your turn, you're very simply placing one of these. Now there's just a couple of rules for placement. Now in the first phase or mode of the game, you can place these seafaring spaces anywhere you want, as long as of course it's in the water. So I can just put this wherever I want. So that could be my turn, simply place that. On my next turn, I could place another one anywhere that I want on any of these ocean or river hexes here. Now if I want to place somebody on land, here on the land side, it has to be adjacent to an existing piece. So obviously on the very first turn of the game, everybody has to at least place, one piece in a water. And then from there, you can start to grow your connections on future turns, placing it adjacent to existing pieces like so. Now, once you place a piece on a good like this, for example, you're going to go ahead and collect that good and set that off to the side and keep that in front of you. Now the third and final type of piece that you can place is one of these villages. Now these of course have to go on land. They also have to be adjacent to an existing piece when you play them. Now the phase is going to end once one of two things happen. Either the last good or resource is collected off of the board, or all of the players have placed all of their pieces out onto the board. Now based on player count, you're going to remove some of these pieces from your starting supply. So in a 4-player game you'll have less. In a 2-player game you just use everything that comes in the box for your color. At that point you're going to score, and I'll explain scoring at the end, but after you score you're going to reset and play the game slightly differently and then score again. The scoring is identical at the end of the first phase and the final phase of the game, but the actual rules for placement are going to vary just a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to clear off all of these cardboard tokens. Everybody's going to get all of these back. All of your wooden villages or huts there are going to remain on the board. So let's say blue player had another one here, and then for fun we'll back out, we'll have yellow have one over there, and there's going to be more scattered throughout the board. The only little twist to that is if you had placed one of your villages on one of these resource spots, this will also get removed from the game and out of play, because after you've removed everything, you're going to reset the board and then place randomly all of the resource goods back onto the board in a new configuration. Once you've reset the board, reseated everything with the resources, removed all of the cardboard tokens, then you are going to proceed again placing your pieces, but in a different kind of way. So in the rules for the second phase, the rules are actually even simpler. Now you can only place pieces adjacent to where you have an existing piece. So now you've got, instead of the kind of the rivers being the starting spots, you have your existing villages or huts. And so you can only place adjacent to an existing piece. So I couldn't just go out and place anything in the water like I wanted to before. I have to start building sort of a trail or a line into the water, and then again we're starting to collect resources and so on. And then again you play until either all the resources are gone or all the players have played all their pieces. And then you're going to score in a few different ways. So the score pad gives you a breakdown of how to score. You'll score the first phase and then again of course the second phase in an identical way. So let's just look at each of these lines here. So this first line means if you are touching 7 of the 8 islands, you're going to get 10 points. If you're touching all 8, you get 20. And that just simply means if you have a piece on an island, you'll count that. If you're on 7 of these islands with a piece, any piece, then you'll get 10 points. If you're touching all 8, then you will get 20 points. The next scoring item is you're trying to get points here by linking as many islands as you can. So let's look at this example here. Right now we're going to take our largest chain touching the most islands. Well, in this case we have 2 chains here. We have this one here, this is 2 islands touching, and then these 2, because we can draw a chain all the way. Now if we were able of course to get another piece in here and draw this bigger chain, we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4. In that case we get 5 points per, and this would be 20 points. So you take a look at your longest contiguous chain and count up all the islands that they're touching, and you multiply it by 5. And then you're going to score, according to this third line, the individual islands. So underneath each of the islands is a point amount. So 6, 10, in this case 8, and then there's points for the rest of the islands on the board. You're going to look and see who has the most pieces on a particular island, and whoever has the most pieces on that one specific island is going to then score that many points. And if there's a tie, you're going to divide these points up evenly based on whoever's tied for that island. And now that we've scored the islands in 3 different ways, we're going to score the resources gathered in 3 possible different ways. The first way you're going to do it is you're going to look at sets of resources. So let's just take a look at these wheat resources that we've gathered. Let's say we collected those 3. You can see for a pair, you're going to get 5 points. You're going to get, for 3 of a kind, which is what we have here, 10 points, and then for 4 of a kind you're going to get 20 points. So if we have this one here, we get 10 points for those. Let's say we had a pair of these green resources here, that would be another 5 points. But if we had 4 more of them, which would have been all of them that were available, you would get 20 points for those. Now next we're going to see if we've collected each of the 4 different resources. Now there's a 5th resource here, which are these monuments, which I'll talk about in a minute. But if you have 1 of each of the other resources, you just get 10 points. If you collect multiple sets of this, that doesn't matter. Once you have 1 of each, you got your 10 points and you're good to go. And then finally, we're going to score these monuments, which are these pieces here, and these are just worth 4 points each straight up. So again, you play 1 phase, putting everything out, starting with the river spaces and growing out from there. Score in 6 different ways, remove all the pieces, leave your wooden huts on the board, reset all the resources, play again, and then score again in the exact same way. And at the end of the game, the player with the most points is the winner. Okay, so that is Blue Lagoon. Let's go through my 3 pillars of reviews. First, I'll talk about actually player time, and the box is 30 to 45 minutes. That's about right. A little bit longer with 4 players, definitely quicker, 20, 30 minutes even with 2 players. Now, as far as player count, I have had a chance to play this at all 3 player counts, 2, 3, and 4. And I would say my favorite player count is certainly 3 or 4, give or take, doesn't really matter. 2 player, less so. It's okay with 2 players. But it's serviceable, it's interesting, there's not really enough going on the board for me to really be too concerned about it. It's just too much of a kind of a zero-sum game, and the sort of the math of it is just it's too right there. Like early on in the turn or in the phase, it's just too much of a solvable kind of thing where it's like, oh, got it, I see where I should probably be going, and it's just a matter of kind of working around that way. Whereas when you add more players in, the dynamics are a little bit different. I can kind of ignore something, go after something else, try to be sneaky, that kind of thing. Now, in terms of what is the game like, this will kind of dovetail into kind of more of the review part of it. I talked at the beginning about comparing this game to like Through the Desert, to Babylonia, which just came out last year, and so on. And I was very interested to try this because after sort of ignoring it, frankly, a couple of years ago, after playing Babylonia, which I obviously love, it's still on my shelf, it was one of my favorite games from last year, I was like, oh, I should really try to take a look at this one because it's kind of feels like it's in the same ballpark, where you're building these networks of your tiles, trying to sort of take over area, score points in a few different ways, and Babylonia is very similar to that, although there are some definite differences. So I was very interested to kind of give this one a try, and it's kind of in the ballpark of Through the Desert, which, if you go back in sort of history at this point with Reiner Knizia, he kind of has like a trilogy of tile placement games. He's got Tigris and Euphrates, Samurai, and Through the Desert. And I never could get into and enjoy Through the Desert. It was just a little bland, a little bit abstract for me. I know that's kind of splitting hairs comparing it to Samurai and Through the Desert, or Tigris and Euphrates, but that was always the one I was like, this one is just sort of very abstract and very positional and didn't really have enough sort of jazz and flavor kind of going on there. But then playing Babylonia, which sort of seems to take elements of all three of those games, frankly, and I really enjoy that game. And I was like, okay, so I feel like Reiner's kind of back in the flow. He's got Babylonia, Quest for El Dorado, which I really liked and played, and then this one I've heard some good things about. And I do really enjoy this game. It's sort of on the vibe, I would say, this is sort of like a kickstart your beginner's tile placement Reiner Knizia game. The box on the front says from ages 8 and up, where that usually means it's more of a family game, where if you see a board game box that says 13 or 14 and up, that doesn't necessarily mean the content is more PG-13. I mean, it could, but it means that you're talking about sort of the skill level and that kind of thing. And I would definitely say that Blue Lagoon is most certainly on the more accessible end of this kind of thing. So, the couple of things. This, if you had to pin me down and say which one do I like more, Babylonia or this one, you already kind of know I don't really like Through the Desert. I would say still I would lean Babylonia, but I wanted to review this one because you can't really find Babylonia. I've seen it out there like on the marketplace for probably too much money, like $80, and I think that's too much money probably for that game, although it's a really good game. So if you have $80 to burn, go ahead and get it. This one though, you can find for like $25, and it's readily available. You can go find it all kinds of different places, online retailers, and your local game store, I'm sure, has copies of it. This one is much prettier than Babylonia as well, but it's not far enough. Babylonia, I don't like it that much better, honestly, to the point where I say, well, let's ignore this one. The availability, but this one does something a little bit different that I think is worth investigating. And this one really is kind of like a Reiner Knizia point salad game. In a lot of ways, Babylonia kind of has that too, but he used to do a lot of kind of weird different scoring, like Samurai scoring is not complex, it's very obtuse to explain, but it's very funky. Tigris and Euphrates is a very funky kind of scoring thing, and he's got some other kind of real interesting twists on how you kind of figure out how many victory points you actually scored. This one is definitely like a point salad game because you can get your longest chain, you can try to do area control on specific big islands, you can try to go for resources and just care about getting those, you can try to kind of spread out and all that kind of stuff, focus certain areas. So it's got a kind of a smorgasbord of scoring, but I don't think it has any kind of the downsides where a lot of people will point at a game and say, oh, it's a point salad, because I think all of the concerns that you have about where and when to score points are very much in conflict with each other, and so that makes the decision space really cool and interesting, because if I just put this one and I can grow and touch that other island, that's really good, but if I don't get this resource before another player, that's going to complete my set or give me the final different resource or whatever. So there's a good kind of balance there that happens with how you sort of grow out everything out. And because the game has those two different kind of modes too, that's also really cool, because if you think about it, like where you put your first piece kind of like dictates your strategy in a lot of ways, because if I put it over on this northeastern river spot, I'm probably going to grow around there. But I can jump down as I start to sort of pick stuff up around this island, because maybe there's a concentration of a lot of the same kind of resource here. I'll do that, get kind of going, and kind of lay my claim so people will stay away from that. And then I start jumping other places with my boats, trying to get other things or touch more islands and that kind of thing. So that sort of approach is very different than in the second phase, where I will have already laid my my village hut pieces. And so that's just having that extra kind of layer of like, oh, I should use a village here so that on the next turn I'll be able to grow out of there. But you don't really know where the resources are, but you just kind of like try to spread out. Because if you have all your villages in the same general location going into the second phase, you're going to be kind of hosed a little bit. So you do want to kind of jump around. So the timing of doing that, sort of like forcefully, planting your flag and saying, hey, I'm going to be in a good shape to go and gobble this up. So if you try to, work your way up here, I'm going to see you coming, that kind of thing. So the balance of that is pretty interesting. Now, the one thing that I think sort of separates it from me from Babylonia, and this is going to be probably something for you if it's like, you might like one more than the other than I necessarily do. Now in Babylonia, you have different tiles, and you're laying stuff very similar to how this one is laid out. There's not really any rules for placement there, but it sort of coaxes you into doing certain things. There's more different styles of pieces to lay claim to certain things. So, the pieces themselves have a little bit more functionality, where this is just, water or land, and then, you have the huts, which just kind of hang out, but they're basically just like a land piece. Whereas in Babylonia, they kind of have more different functions. And then, so that's interesting and cool in some ways. And there's also some like special abilities you can capture in Babylonia, which is kind of what frankly kind of knocks that one a notch above. But in this one, I think the other thing that is sort of interesting, and just kind of to sort of throw out there, is it's kind of a caveat, but I'm going to try verbally not to over or undersell this next statement. So the beginnings of the rounds are really interesting in Blue Lagoon. And the gameplay is 35 minutes. So again, don't hone on this too much, but just kind of an interesting sort of feeling that the game gives you. So the interesting part of the first part of the round is like, oh God, I can go here, I can go there, I could do this, I could do that, I can grow here and do that. And then that sort of slowly fades as you see more and more pieces. Because after a while, it's like, I'm gonna leave that bottom left island alone. Billy's got all that. It's going to cost me too many turns to kind of work my way down there. I might work my way down there just to touch it, to get to that last island, but I'm not going to try to go gobble up all the resources there or compete with them for area control. So the last, I don't know if it's like the last third, it's probably the last quarter, last fifth, last 20% of each of the phases is a little bit automatic. Like you could almost just say, okay, everybody just put their pieces down, because you kind of know what you're going to go on. It's not that quite extreme, probably the last 10% of turns on each phase. But that's because you've sort of laid your claim and positioned everything out, and you have those things where it's like, okay, well now, towards the end of the round, I have to go get that, I got to get that resource. I locked it out, I put all my pieces around it, and I just leave it alone. You just leave it alone because everybody else is far away from it, and then you can go compete in other places. So that kind of arc is actually really cool. Because then you do it, and then everybody's like, oh, it's kind of like playing chicken. Oh, I'll move a piece down there. Oh, I'm like 3 steps away. Oh, now I'm 2 steps away, and then 1 step away. Okay, now I have to take the resource because you were going to do it on your next turn. And so that sort of thing is really interesting for the first, let's say, 80, 90% of a phase. And then the last 10% is like, oh, well, I got to do this, got to do that, got to do that, I got to do that. So it becomes a little bit automatic, but it's not the end of the world. Whereas in like Babylonia, because you have sort of like a hand of tiles and you're drawing them randomly, then that adds that extra layer to me to sort of do that. But if I had not played Babylonia, then I would say this probably would be like higher up on like my list or whatever you want to say. Like I would just like it that much more. As it stands, I really do like it, and it's fun, and it's definitely more accessible than Babylonia, and it plays quicker. Maybe, they both play pretty quick. But I do like the point salad kind of thing that's going on here. It's an interesting sort of approach that he's not really done before. So Babylonia kind of has the same thing. But so it's interesting to see these kind of two sort of tile games that are very different, but very much kind of in the same ballpark next to each other. But I would say I do recommend the game because it's only $25, right? and you're gonna play it in half an hour or so. And I would say, yeah, get Babylonia instead, but you're going to be paying $80 or more on the third-party market because it hasn't come to the US yet, and you can't find it. And so there you go. And this is definitely a more of a family-weight game. There's not a lot more rules in Babylonia, but I think if playing with, like, let's say an 8-year-old, like this says, I think this one's going to be, pick it up and play, teach rules in 2 seconds, and then you can score it as you go, and then away you go. But definitely recommend it. Great production, great artwork, and all that stuff. And so Reiner's back. He's got Babylonia, he's got this Blue Lagoon game, he's got Quest for El Dorado. Some very different stuff than some of the stuff he kind of used to work on. So anyway, I definitely recommend at least taking a look at this one. Thanks.